Hey everyone, welcome back to another journey into the ancient world where gods walked among mortals, and every sunset brought new drama to Mount Olympus. Tonight we're diving deep into the fascinating yet wonderfully sleep-inducing tales of two of Greek mythology's most complex deities. So, get comfortable, maybe adjust those pillows, dim those lights, and let's ease into some stories that are guaranteed to send you off to the most peaceful slumber. Before we begin our mythological voyage, I'm genuinely curious where you're all listening from tonight. Drop a comment below with your location and what time it is there. It absolutely amazes me how these ancient stories can bring people together from every corner of the globe, all settling in for a good night's rest with tales that are thousands of years old. Now, you might be wondering why I chose Athena and Hades for tonight's sleepy storytelling session. Well, these two represent something beautifully contradictory in Greek mythology. Athena, the goddess of wisdom and strategic warfare, whose very birth involved Zeus getting a splitting headache that could only be cured by having his skull cracked open with an axe. And Hades, the often misunderstood ruler of the underworld, who wasn't evil, but simply drew the short straw in the cosmic lottery of divine responsibilities. What makes these particular myths perfect for sleep is their gentle pacing and thoughtful nature. Unlike the explosive drama of Zeus's love affairs or the chaotic adventures of Hermes, the stories of Athena and Hades unfold with a measured cadence that naturally slows your breathing and relaxes your mind. These aren't tales of frantic action, but rather deep explorations of wisdom, duty, and the quieter aspects of divine power. Let's begin with Athena, whose very existence challenges everything we think we know about birth and beginnings. Picture, if you will, the mighty Zeus ruling from his throne on Mount Olympus, when suddenly he's struck by the most excruciating headache imaginable. This wasn't your ordinary tension headache from dealing with quarreling gods and goddesses. No, this was the result of having swallowed his first wife, Metis, whole after hearing a prophecy that their child would be wiser than Zeus himself. The other gods watched in bewilderment as their king clutched his head in agony, his face contorted with pain that seemed to grow stronger with each passing moment. Thunder rolled across the heavens, not from Zeus's usual displays of power, but from his suffering. Lightning flickered erratically, reflecting the chaos within the king of the gods. Finally, unable to bear the pain any longer, Zeus called upon Hephaestus, the divine blacksmith whose skill with hammer and forge was unmatched even among the immortals. With careful precision, Hephaestus raised his mighty axe and brought it down upon Zeus's skull. The sound that echoed across Olympus wasn't the crack of bone, but something far more musical, like the ringing of the finest bronze. From that opening emerged Athena, not as a helpless infant but as a fully grown goddess, complete with armor, spear, and shield. Her gray eyes held the depth of infinite wisdom, and her bearing commanded immediate respect from every deity present. She stepped forth from her father's head with the confidence of someone who had been born knowing her purpose, her destiny already clear in her divine mind. But Athena's wisdom wasn't the cold, calculating intelligence of a scholar locked away in dusty libraries. Her wisdom was practical, strategic, and deeply connected to the art of living well. She understood that true intelligence required not just knowledge, but the ability to apply that knowledge with justice and restraint. This made her unique among the Olympic gods, who were often ruled by passion, jealousy, and impulsive desires. Consider how Athena approached conflict, which was so different from her half-brother Ares. Where Ares represented the brutal, chaotic nature of war, the blood-soaked battlefields where reason gave way to rage, Athena embodied strategic warfare. She was the goddess who inspired generals to think 3 moves ahead, who whispered tactical advantages to commanders on the eve of battle, who understood that the greatest victories often came not through superior force, but through superior planning. Her relationship with mortals was equally thoughtful and measured. Athena didn't demand worship through fear or intimidation. Instead, she earned devotion through her genuine care for human advancement and civilization. She was the goddess who taught mortals the art of weaving, turning simple threads into complex patterns that reflected the interconnectedness of life itself. The olive tree, which became her sacred symbol, perfectly embodied her approach to divine gifts. When she and Poseidon competed for the patronage of what would become Athens, Poseidon struck the ground with his trident and produced a spring of water. It was an impressive display of divine power, but the water was salty and ultimately useless for drinking or irrigation. Athena's gift was quieter but infinitely more valuable. She planted an olive tree, explaining to the gathered mortals that its fruit would feed them, its oil would light their lamps and season their food, and its branches would provide wood for tools and shelter. The olive tree would live for hundreds of years, providing generation after generation with sustenance and utility. It was a gift that kept giving, requiring patience and care, but ultimately proving far more valuable than any dramatic display of divine power. The mortals chose Athena's gift, and thus the great city of Athens was named in her honor. But what's particularly telling about this story is Athena's reaction to victory. She didn't gloat or demean Poseidon's offering. Instead, she quietly set about helping the Athenians build a civilization worthy of her patronage, teaching them not just practical skills but the principles of justice, democracy, and philosophical inquiry that would make Athens the intellectual center of the ancient world. Athena's temples were places of learning as much as worship. The Parthenon, her greatest shrine, wasn't just a monument to divine power, but a symbol of human achievement in architecture, sculpture, and civic planning. Pilgrims came not just to offer sacrifices, but to participate in festivals that celebrated wisdom, artistic achievement, and the pursuit of knowledge. Her priestesses were known not for dramatic prophecies or ecstatic rituals, but for their learning and practical wisdom. They served as advisors to rulers, teachers to the young, and keepers of knowledge that preserved and transmitted the accumulated wisdom of generations. In Athena's service, devotion and education were inseparably linked. The goddess also had a particular fondness for heroes, but not the flashy, glory-seeking warriors that other gods favored. Athena preferred heroes who combined courage with wisdom, who thought before they acted, and who understood that true heroism often involved making difficult choices for the greater good. Odysseus was perhaps her favorite mortal, and their relationship perfectly illustrated Athena's approach to divine mentorship. She didn't simply grant Odysseus supernatural powers or solve his problems for him. Instead, she provided guidance, subtle assistance, and the occasional divine intervention at crucial moments, but always in ways that allowed Odysseus to use his own intelligence and resourcefulness. During his long journey home from Troy, Athena appeared to Odysseus in dreams, offering advice disguised as the words of trusted friends or family members. She helped him see through deceptions, recognize hidden dangers, and find creative solutions to seemingly impossible challenges. But the actual thinking, planning, and execution remained Odysseus's responsibility. This collaborative approach to heroism reflected Athena's deep respect for mortal potential. She believed that humans were capable of great wisdom and achievement, but needed guidance and encouragement to reach their full potential. Her interventions were like a master teacher's assistants, providing just enough help to allow students to discover their own capabilities. Athena's wisdom extended to understanding the importance of peaceful arts alongside military prowess. She was equally revered as the patron of craftspeople, inventors, and artists. The skills she taught, weaving, pottery, metalworking, and architecture, were seen as forms of practical wisdom that improved daily life and created beauty in the world. The goddess understood that true civilization required both the ability to defend itself and the capacity to create, to build, to make life better and more beautiful. A city protected by strong walls but lacking in art, learning, and craftsmanship was merely a fortress. A city with magnificent temples and skilled artisans but no ability to defend itself would quickly fall to its enemies. Athena's approach to justice was similarly balanced and thoughtful. She served as a divine judge in disputes that required careful consideration of complex moral questions. Her decisions were known for their fairness and their attention to long-term consequences rather than immediate satisfaction. The goddess understood that true justice required not just punishment of wrongdoing, but the restoration of balance and the prevention of future harm. Her judgments often included requirements for restitution, learning, or service that helped wrongdoers understand the impact of their actions and develop better character. As we drift deeper into these ancient tales, let your breathing slow and your muscles relax. Picture Athena in her temple, surrounded by scrolls and instruments of learning, her gray eyes reflecting the gentle light of oil lamps as she contemplates the eternal questions of wisdom and justice. The soft rustle of parchment, the quiet scratch of stylus on wax tablet, and the distant sound of fountains in the temple courtyard create a peaceful atmosphere perfect for rest. Her wisdom was never hurried, never forced, but flowed like honey from the comb, sweet and nourishing to all who encountered it. The goddess understood that the most profound truths often came to those who waited patiently, who observed carefully, and who listened with both their minds and their hearts open to understanding. Now, let us turn our attention to Hades, perhaps the most misunderstood of all the Olympic gods, whose realm lay far beneath the sunlit world of mortals and immortals alike. While his brothers Zeus and Poseidon divided the bright expanses of sky and sea between them, Hades received dominion over the shadowy underworld, a vast and complex realm that existed in the spaces between life and death, memory and forgetting. The underworld wasn't the fiery place of torment that later mythologies would imagine. Instead, it was a place of profound quiet, where the rushing concerns of mortal life finally came to rest. Picture vast caverns lit by the gentle glow of phosphorescent stones, where the sound of flowing water echoed softly through chambers that stretched beyond the limits of sight. The river's Styx wound through this realm like a silver ribbon, its waters carrying the whispered secrets of countless souls who had crossed from life into whatever lay beyond. Hades himself was not the cruel tyrant that fearful mortals imagined, but rather a thoughtful administrator of cosmic necessity. He understood better than any other deity the weight of responsibility, the burden of maintaining order in a realm where chaos could easily reign. Every soul that entered his domain required his attention, his judgment, and his care, for eternity was a very long time indeed. The god of the underworld was tall and dignified, with the kind of presence that commanded respect without demanding it. His beard was dark as the deepest cave, and his eyes held the patient sadness of someone who had seen every form of human suffering and triumph. He wore robes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and when he moved, it was with the deliberate grace of someone who never needed to hurry because time itself bent to his will. Unlike his more volatile brothers, Hades rarely left his realm. He had no interest in the political machinations of Olympus, no desire for worship or adulation from mortals. His satisfaction came from the proper functioning of his domain, from ensuring that the great cosmic cycle of life and death continued its eternal dance without interruption. The underworld was organized with the same careful attention to detail that Athena brought to her strategic planning. The realm was divided into distinct regions, each serving a specific purpose in the great work of processing and housing souls. The asphodel meadows stretched endlessly, a place of neutral peace where souls who had lived neither particularly virtuous nor particularly wicked lives could rest in gentle twilight. Here, the atmosphere was one of profound calm, like the feeling you get just before falling asleep when all the day's worries finally release their hold on your mind. Souls wandered through fields of pale flowers that never bloomed and never faded, engaged in quiet conversations about the lives they had lived, the loves they had known, and the dreams they had pursued. Elysium, the blessed realm within the underworld, was reserved for heroes and the especially virtuous. This wasn't a place of loud celebration or constant festivity, but rather a realm where contentment flowed as naturally as breathing. The light here was soft and golden, like afternoon sunlight filtered through honey. Heroes who had spent their mortal lives in constant struggle finally found the peace they had always sought but never quite achieved in life. They spent their days in gentle pursuits that brought them joy without exhaustion, in conversations that deepened understanding without creating conflict, in contemplation that brought wisdom without the pain that often accompanied learning during mortal life. Time moved differently here, not in the rushed urgency of mortal existence, but in the unhurried rhythm of eternal contentment. Tartarus, the place of punishment, was reserved for those who had committed crimes against the cosmic order itself. But even here, Hades' justice was not born of cruelty but of necessity. The punishments, while severe, were designed not for sadistic pleasure but to maintain the balance that kept the entire universe functioning properly. The three judges of the underworld, Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Aeacus, worked tirelessly to ensure that each soul received exactly what their mortal life had earned them. They were not harsh or vindictive, but possessed the kind of perfect fairness that could only exist beyond the passions and prejudices of mortal existence. Hades himself rarely intervened in their judgments, trusting their wisdom and understanding that justice, to be truly just, must be administered without favoritism or personal involvement. He was like a master craftsman who had trained apprentices so well that they could carry on the work without his constant supervision. The god's relationship with his three-headed dog, Cerberus, perfectly illustrated his character. The massive creature, with eyes like burning coals and a bark that could shake the foundations of mountains, was often portrayed as a fearsome monster. But to Hades, Cerberus was simply a faithful companion who helped maintain the necessary boundaries of his realm. The dog's three heads allowed him to see in all directions simultaneously, making him the perfect guardian for the gates between life and death. His loyalty to Hades was absolute, not born of fear, but of genuine affection for a master who treated him with kindness and respect. In quiet moments, when the business of the underworld permitted, Hades would sit beside his great hound, running his fingers through the creature's dark fur while they both gazed out over the vast expanse of their shared domain. The relationship between Hades and Persephone has been told many times, but rarely with attention to the quiet depths of their eventual partnership. Yes, the beginning was troubled, marked by Hades' impulsive decision to abduct the young goddess of spring. But what developed between them over time was something far more complex and meaningful than simple romance. Persephone brought to the underworld something it had always lacked: the perspective of someone who understood growth, renewal, and the gentle power of life asserting itself against all obstacles. Her presence didn't change the fundamental nature of a Hades realm, but it added layers of meaning and beauty that had never existed there before. During the months when she ruled beside Hades as queen of the underworld, Persephone discovered that death was not the opposite of life, but simply another form of it. She learned to see the beauty in the quiet moments between heartbeats, the peace that came when struggling finally ceased, and the profound rest that awaited all living things at the end of their earthly journeys. Together, they created a partnership based on complementary understanding. Hades brought the deep wisdom that comes from witnessing the end of all stories, while Persephone contributed the hope that comes from knowing that every ending is also a beginning. Their love was not the passionate fire of mortal romance, but the steady warmth of two souls who had found perfect balance in each other's presence. The underworld under their joint rule became a place where souls could truly rest, where the weight of mortal concerns could finally be set down, where the endless questions that plagued living minds could finally find their answers. It was neither paradise nor punishment, but something more valuable, a place where existence could simply be, without striving, without fear, without the constant pressure to become something other than what one already was. The rivers that flowed through Hades' domain each carried their own gift to the souls who encountered them. The Lethe offered forgetfulness to those who had suffered too much in life, allowing painful memories to dissolve like salt in water. The Acheron carried the weight of woe away from souls who had borne too much sorrow. The Cocytus provided release for those who needed to weep one final time before finding peace. These waters were not punishment but mercy, allowing souls to shed the burdens that had become too heavy to carry. Hades understood that true rest sometimes required letting go of the very experiences that had defined mortal existence. Memory, while precious, could also be a prison, and sometimes the kindest gift was the opportunity to forget. The god of the underworld moved through his realm with the quiet authority of someone who had never needed to prove his power through displays or threats. His word was law, not because he enforced it with violence, but because his judgments were always fair, his decisions always considered, and his presence always calming to the restless spirits under his care. Even the most troubled souls found peace in his presence, sensing in him the kind of deep stability that comes from absolute certainty about one's purpose and place in the cosmic order. He was like a mountain, unchanging and reliable, a fixed point around which the entire cycle of existence could safely revolve. As night deepens around you and these ancient tales weave their gentle spell, let your mind drift with the slow, eternal rivers of the underworld, where time moves like honey and every breath brings deeper peace. The weight of the day's concerns grows lighter with each word, each image of divine wisdom and underworld tranquility guiding you toward the restful sleep that awaits. In the depths of Hades' realm, where silence was not empty but full of profound understanding, the god himself found his greatest satisfaction in the small, unnoticed moments of his daily routine. Each morning, if morning could be said to exist in a place where the sun never shone, Hades would walk the perimeter of his domain, checking on the various districts and regions that required his oversight. His footsteps made no sound on the soft earth of the underworld paths, yet every soul in his realm somehow sensed his presence and found comfort in knowing their king was watching over them. The god carried with him an aura of such complete calm that even the most agitated spirits would settle into peaceful contemplation when he passed near. The administrative duties of ruling the afterlife were far more complex than most realized. Each soul that arrived required careful evaluation, not just of their mortal deeds, but of their intentions, their circumstances, and their deepest nature. Hades approached this responsibility with the methodical patience of a master gardener tending an infinite garden, understanding that each soul was unique and required individual attention. He maintained detailed records, not in the manner of a bureaucrat obsessed with paperwork, but like a devoted shepherd who knew each member of his flock by name and temperament. The god understood that eternity was meaningless without purpose, and he worked tirelessly to ensure that every soul in his care found their proper place and function in the great tapestry of the afterlife. The palace of Hades stood at the heart of his realm, built not from marble or gold, but from a dark stone that seemed to absorb and hold warmth rather than deflect it. The architecture was simple yet magnificent, with vast halls that could accommodate gatherings of countless souls, and intimate chambers where private conversations could unfold without disturbance. In his private study, Hades kept scrolls that chronicled the stories of every soul who had ever entered his domain. These weren't cold records of judgment and punishment, but loving chronicles of mortal lives, complete with their struggles, triumphs, failures, and moments of unexpected grace. He read these stories in quiet hours, not out of idle curiosity, but from genuine care for the beings who had been entrusted to his eternal protection. The god's throne was carved from a single piece of obsidian, polished to a surface so smooth it seemed to contain depths that went on forever. When he sat upon it to receive newly arrived souls, his presence radiated such profound acceptance that even the most fearful spirits found themselves speaking honestly about their mortal experiences, unburdening themselves of secrets they had carried to their graves. Hades listened to each confession, each justification, each plea for understanding with the infinite patience of someone who had heard every possible variation of human experience. He never interrupted, never showed impatience, and never passed judgment based on his personal feelings. His decisions flowed from a deep well of cosmic justice that took into account not just actions, but circumstances, not just choices, but the limitations that had shaped those choices. The seasons in the underworld were subtle, marked not by changes in temperature or vegetation, but by shifts in the quality of light and the rhythm of activities throughout the realm. When Persephone was present, the domain took on a different character, not brighter exactly, but somehow more alive with possibility. Her influence brought a gentle energy that reminded souls of the beauty they had known in life without making them ache with longing for what they could never have again. During her absence, when she returned to the upper world to bring spring to mortal lands, the underworld settled into a deeper quiet, a more contemplative mood that was equally valuable in its own way. These periods allowed souls to turn inward, to process their experiences and find the deeper meanings that had perhaps escaped them during the busy urgency of mortal existence. Hades himself cherished both aspects of his realm's rhythm. Persephone's presence brought him joy and companionship, while her absences provided the solitude he needed to attend to the more demanding aspects of his duties. He never resented her departures or begrudged the upper world its claim on her time, understanding that the balance between life and death required her to serve both realms with equal dedication. The god's relationship with his brothers remained cordial but distant, marked by fundamental differences in temperament and responsibility. When Zeus occasionally visited the underworld, usually on some official business related to cosmic order, Hades received him with proper respect, but without the eager deference that other gods showed the king of Olympus. In his own realm, Hades was sovereign, and even Zeus understood that certain cosmic balances required this independence to be maintained. The underworld could not function properly if its ruler was subject to the political whims and emotional volatility that characterized much of Olympian governance. Death was too important, too final, too sacred to be influenced by the petty concerns that often drove divine politics. Poseidon's visits were even rarer, as the god of the sea found the stillness of the underworld unsettling after the constant motion and energy of his oceanic domain. When he did come, usually to discuss matters related to the rivers that flowed between their respective realms, he was always eager to return to his waves and storms, unable to appreciate the profound peace that Hades found so nourishing. These differences didn't create conflict between the brothers, but rather a mutual understanding that they were each perfectly suited to their particular spheres of influence. Hades felt no envy for his brother's more celebrated domains, finding in the underworld everything he needed for fulfillment and purpose. The god's daily interactions with his subjects revealed the gentler aspects of his nature that were unknown to the mortal world above. He would spend hours in conversation with souls who were struggling to adapt to their new existence, offering not false comfort but honest guidance about how to find meaning in their eternal circumstances. For souls who had died young, he provided patient explanations about the nature of time and growth in the afterlife, helping them understand that their development could continue in new forms that didn't depend on physical existence. For those who had lived long lives full of regret, he offered the wisdom of perspective, showing them how their supposed failures had often contributed to outcomes they could never have anticipated. His conversations with heroes were particularly fascinating, as these souls often struggled with the absence of challenges and conflicts that had defined their mortal existence. Hades helped them discover that true heroism could take many forms in the afterlife, from mentoring newly arrived souls to maintaining the delicate balances that kept the underworld functioning smoothly. The god understood that immortal existence, whether in the underworld or on Olympus, required different virtues than mortal life. Patience became more important than courage, wisdom more valuable than strength, and compassion more necessary than justice. He worked tirelessly to help souls develop these eternal qualities, knowing that their happiness in the afterlife depended on successfully making this transition. Some souls arrived in his realm already possessing the temperament needed for peaceful eternal existence, while others required centuries of gentle guidance before they could fully embrace their new circumstances. Hades provided this guidance without judgment or impatience, understanding that the transition from temporal to eternal existence was perhaps the most difficult challenge any consciousness could face. The god's greatest pride lay not in the magnificent architecture of his palace or the efficient organization of his realm, but in witnessing the moment when a troubled soul finally found peace. These transformations happened quietly, without fanfare or celebration, but they represented victories more significant than any battle won on the fields of Troy or any monster defeated by mortal heroes. In these quiet moments of breakthrough, when fear gave way to acceptance and restlessness settled into contentment, Hades saw reflected the true purpose of his existence and the reason why he had been chosen to rule this most essential of all realms. Death was not his enemy, but his partner in the great work of bringing all consciousness to its ultimate rest and understanding. As the eternal twilight of the underworld deepened around these ancient tales, let your own consciousness settle into the same peaceful rhythm that governed Hades' domain, where every breath grows softer, every thought more distant, and sleep approaches with the gentle inevitability of a tide returning to shore. The weight of conscious awareness grows lighter with each passing moment, carried away on the dark, quiet rivers that flow through the realm of dreams. The god's wisdom extended far beyond mere administration of souls, reaching into the subtle art of helping consciousness itself transition from the frantic pace of mortal existence to the measured rhythms of eternity. Each newly arrived spirit brought with them the accumulated habits of a lifetime, spent rushing, striving, and grasping after fleeting pleasures and temporary securities that had no meaning in this timeless realm. Hades observed these patterns with the patient attention of a master craftsman studying raw materials, understanding that each soul's unique combination of memories, attachments, and unconscious tensions would require its own specific approach to healing. Some arrived clutching desperately to the identities they had worn in life, unable to comprehend that titles, possessions, and social positions had no currency in a realm where all beings existed as pure consciousness. For these souls, the god provided gentle lessons in letting go, not through harsh stripping away of cherished illusions, but through gradual introduction to deeper forms of identity that transcended the superficial markers of mortal success. He would guide them to quiet gardens where they could sit beneath trees whose leaves whispered with the accumulated wisdom of countless ages, allowing the soft susurrus of eternal knowledge to slowly penetrate their resistant understanding. The gardens of the underworld were among its most remarkable features, though few poets in the upper world had ever described them accurately. These weren't the wild, chaotic growths of mortal landscapes, nor the artificially perfect arrangements favored by gods who sought to impress rather than soothe. Instead, they were spaces where the very essence of growth and beauty had been distilled to its purest form. Here grew flowers that bloomed without seasons, their petals holding colors that had no names in mortal languages, shifting through spectrums of meaning rather than mere visual appearance. The fragrance they released didn't simply please the senses, but carried emotional resonances that helped troubled souls remember what peace felt like, what contentment meant, and how love could exist without the desperate clinging that characterized so many mortal relationships. Trees in these gardens bore fruit that nourished not the body but the spirit, each variety offering a different form of comfort or understanding. Some helped souls release the guilt that had poisoned their final years of life, while others provided the clarity needed to see how their apparent failures had actually contributed to the greater tapestry of existence in ways they had never imagined. Hades himself had planted many of these trees with his own hands, not out of necessity, but from the deep satisfaction he found in nurturing growth that would benefit countless generations of souls. Each seed he placed in the rich, dark earth of his realm was chosen with careful consideration for the specific healing properties it would eventually provide. The god's relationship with time was perhaps the most difficult concept for newly arrived souls to understand. In the mortal world, time moved like a rushing river, carrying everything along in its relentless current toward inevitable endings. But in the underworld, time moved more like a vast, still lake, where movement occurred but without the urgent pressure that characterized temporal existence. This difference required a fundamental shift in consciousness that many souls found deeply disorienting initially. They would arrive still operating under the assumption that they needed to accomplish things quickly, that opportunities would be lost if not seized immediately, that delay meant failure and hesitation meant weakness. Hades helped these souls understand that in eternity, haste was not just unnecessary, but actively harmful to the process of finding true contentment. He would demonstrate this through his own example, moving through his daily routines with the unhurried grace of someone who knew that every important task would be completed in its proper time, that every necessary conversation would occur when both parties were truly ready for it. The god's throne room served as a classroom where these lessons in eternal time were taught not through lectures, but through lived experience. Souls who came before him, seeking immediate answers to questions that had plagued them in life, gradually learned to appreciate the value of sitting in thoughtful silence, allowing understanding to emerge naturally rather than forcing premature conclusions. In this space, conversations unfolded according to their own internal rhythms rather than external pressures. A soul might spend what would have been years in mortal time simply learning to breathe without anxiety, to exist without constantly planning the next action, to be present without the nagging sense that they should be somewhere else doing something more important. Hades possessed the remarkable ability to give each soul exactly as much time as they needed for these fundamental adjustments, never rushing them toward insights they weren't ready to integrate, never withholding guidance when they had reached the point where they could truly benefit from it. His patience was as infinite as eternity itself, grounded in the understanding that forced enlightenment was no enlightenment at all. The god's own journey toward this level of wisdom had been long and sometimes difficult. Unlike Zeus, who had been groomed for leadership and authority from birth, or Poseidon, whose domain naturally suited his tempestuous nature, Hades had been thrust into a role that few would have chosen willingly. The underworld had initially seemed like exile, a punishment for drawing the shortest straw in the cosmic lottery. But over the eons, Hades had discovered that his apparent misfortune was actually the greatest gift he could have received. In learning to find meaning and satisfaction in what others saw as a grim and thankless duty, he had developed depths of character and understanding that his more celebrated brothers would never achieve. The loneliness that had initially been his greatest challenge became the source of his greatest strength, teaching him the value of solitude, the importance of self-reliance, and the profound peace that could be found in accepting one's circumstances rather than constantly fighting against them. This hard-won wisdom enabled him to help other souls navigate their own journeys from resistance to acceptance. The god's relationship with memory was particularly nuanced and sophisticated. Unlike the simple offering of forgetfulness provided by the river Lethe, Hades understood that healing often required a careful balance between remembering and releasing. Some memories needed to be preserved because they contained essential lessons or beautiful experiences that enriched the soul's eternal existence. But other memories, particularly those involving trauma, betrayal, or profound loss, required careful transformation before they could be safely integrated into a soul's permanent consciousness. Hades had developed techniques for helping souls sort through their accumulated experiences, keeping what served their growth while gently releasing what only caused suffering. This process couldn't be rushed or forced, as attempting to remove memories prematurely often created new forms of psychological fragmentation that were even more difficult to heal. Instead, the god worked with each soul to gradually build the strength and perspective needed to face their most difficult experiences from a place of safety and understanding. The transformation of painful memories into sources of wisdom and compassion was perhaps the most delicate art practiced in the underworld. It required not just the elimination of emotional charge from traumatic experiences, but the careful extraction of whatever valuable insights those experiences contained about the nature of existence, the complexity of mortal relationships, and the resilience of consciousness itself. Souls who successfully completed this process often became some of Hades' most valuable assistants, helping newly arrived spirits navigate similar challenges with the credibility that only comes from having walked the path oneself. These healed souls found deep satisfaction in service, discovering that their own suffering had been transformed into a gift they could offer to others. The god observed these transformations with quiet pride, understanding that each soul who found peace in his realm contributed to the overall harmony that made the underworld a place of genuine rest rather than mere absence of activity. The collective wisdom of countless healed spirits created an atmosphere of such profound acceptance that even the most traumatized arrivals could sense on some level that healing was possible. Persephone's influence on these processes was subtle but significant. During her months in the underworld, her presence reminded souls that growth and renewal were possible even in the absence of physical life. She brought to the realm a quality of gentle encouragement that complemented Hades' patient stability, creating an environment where transformation could occur without pressure or judgment. Her own journey from frightened captive to confident queen provided inspiration for souls who felt overwhelmed by their circumstances. They could see in her example that adaptation didn't require the abandonment of one's essential nature, but rather the discovery of new aspects of that nature that had been waiting for the right conditions to emerge. The seasonal rhythm of her presence and absence created natural cycles of introspection and growth that benefited the entire realm. During her times away, souls turned inward, processing their experiences and integrating new understanding. During her returns, they shared their insights with others and renewed their commitment to the ongoing work of spiritual development. Hades had learned to appreciate both phases of this cycle, finding in Persephone's departures an opportunity for the deeper contemplation that his nature required, while welcoming her returns as times of renewal and shared purpose. Their partnership had evolved into something far richer than either had originally imagined possible, demonstrating that even the most challenging beginnings could lead to profound connection and mutual growth. The gods' daily routine reflected this rhythm of solitude and companionship, work and rest, administration and contemplation. Each day began with a period of silent reflection in which he attuned himself to the overall state of his realm, sensing the areas where his attention was most needed and the souls who might benefit from his direct intervention. These moments of communion with his domain were among his most treasured experiences, offering him the same sense of peace and connection that mortals might find in prayer or meditation. In the vast silence of the underworld, he could feel the slow pulse of eternal existence, the gentle breathing of countless souls at rest, and the deep satisfaction that came from knowing that all was as it should be. As consciousness drifts deeper into the rhythm of these ancient tales, let the peaceful authority of Hades' realm settle into your own awareness, where thoughts become as soft as whispers, and the day's concerns dissolve like mist before the dawn. In this space between waking and sleeping, where wisdom flows like honey and understanding comes without effort, the gentle current of rest carries you toward the shores of dreams, where even the gods find their perfect peace. The corridors of the underworld palace echoed with the soft footsteps of souls who had found their purpose in service to the greater harmony of the realm. These weren't servants in the mortal sense, bound by necessity or fear, but spirits who had discovered that their greatest fulfillment came through contributing to the well-being of others who still struggled with the transition from temporal to eternal existence. Some had become guides, helping newly arrived souls navigate the complex geography of the afterlife, while others served as counselors, offering the wisdom that comes only from having personally experienced the challenges their clients faced. Still others had found their calling in the maintenance of the realm's more subtle aspects, tending to the emotional atmosphere of different regions, ensuring that each area provided exactly the right environment for the souls who dwelled there. Hades observed these voluntary servants with deep appreciation, understanding that their willingness to serve others represented the highest form of spiritual development possible in any realm. They had transcended the self-centered concerns that dominated mortal existence, and discovered the profound joy that comes from making one's entire existence a gift to the greater good. These evolved souls moved through their duties with the same unhurried grace that characterized their king, having learned that genuine service required not frantic activity, but thoughtful attention to the real needs of those they sought to help. They listened more than they spoke, observed more than they acted, and offered guidance only when it was truly wanted, rather than when they felt compelled to share their insights. Human consciousness and divine wisdom thus blended in perfect harmony throughout Hades' domain, creating an environment where growth continued long after the end of mortal life, where understanding deepened with each passing eon, and where every soul eventually found not just peace, but purpose in the vast, gentle mystery of eternal existence. The therapeutic nature of these eternal rhythms had a profound effect on souls who arrived carrying the accumulated stress of mortal existence. Many came bearing invisible wounds from lives spent in constant anxiety about the future, regret about the past, or frustration with circumstances they could never fully control. The underworld's atmosphere of timeless acceptance worked like a gentle balm on these spiritual injuries. Hades had observed over countless ages that healing followed predictable patterns, though each soul's journey remained uniquely their own. The first phase typically involved a kind of spiritual exhaustion, where newly arrived spirits simply collapsed into rest after lifetimes of striving and struggling. This wasn't sleep as mortals understood it, but rather a deep release of tension that had been held so long it had become part of their essential nature. During this period of profound rest, souls often experienced what could only be described as a spiritual detoxification. The accumulated poisons of resentment, fear, and desperate attachment slowly leached away, leaving behind a cleaner, clearer sense of self that many had never experienced even in their healthiest mortal years. The god provided gentle oversight during these vulnerable times, ensuring that souls felt safe enough to let go of the psychological armor that had protected them in life, but now only hindered their growth. The second phase involved a gradual reawakening of curiosity about existence itself. Freed from the urgent demands of survival and success, souls began to ask questions they had never had time to consider during their earthly lives. What was the true nature of love when stripped of possessiveness and fear? How did consciousness relate to the vast cosmos that contained it? What purposes might existence serve beyond the immediate satisfaction of physical needs and social expectations? These questions weren't answered through lectures or divine pronouncements, but through direct experience, carefully guided by Hades and his most experienced souls. The god had learned that understanding forced upon consciousness from outside rarely took root, while insights that emerged from within through patient exploration became permanent parts of a soul's wisdom. The underworld contained vast libraries where souls could explore these questions through the accumulated knowledge of countless civilizations and ages. But these weren't ordinary books filled with words and theories. Instead, they contained direct experiences, emotions, and understandings that could be absorbed and integrated at whatever pace each soul required. A spirit curious about the nature of courage might spend years experiencing the memories of heroes and cowards, understanding not just their actions but the internal states that had led to those actions. Someone seeking to understand love might explore the experiences of parents, lovers, friends, and enemies, gradually developing a comprehensive appreciation for the many forms that deep connection could take. Hades himself often walked through these libraries, not to supervise or direct the learning taking place there, but simply to share in the quiet joy of consciousness discovering its own depths. He found profound satisfaction in witnessing the moment when a soul's understanding expanded to encompass some new aspect of existence, their entire being brightening with the illumination that comes from genuine insight. The god's own understanding had been enriched by eons of observing these processes of discovery and growth. Each soul that passed through his realm taught him something new about the magnificent complexity of consciousness, the countless ways that awareness could organize itself, and the infinite potential for growth that seemed to be built into the very fabric of existence. Some souls were drawn to contemplation and philosophy, spending their eternal existence in deep reflection on the fundamental questions of being. Others found their calling in creative expression, composing music that captured emotional truths too subtle for words, or creating visual art that revealed hidden patterns in the cosmic order. Still, others discovered their gift lay in direct service to newly arrived souls, offering the kind of compassionate presence that could help a frightened spirit find their footing in this strange new existence. Each path was equally valued in Hades' realm, as the god understood that diversity of purpose and expression was essential to the healthy functioning of any community, mortal or immortal. The palace gardens provided spaces where souls could pursue these various callings in environments perfectly suited to their needs. Quiet groves offered solitude for contemplation, while open meadows encouraged gathering and collaboration. Workshops provided materials and tools for artistic creation, though these operated according to principles of thought and intention rather than physical manipulation. In these workshops, souls learned to create through direct expression of their inner states, crafting objects and experiences that perfectly embodied their understanding and emotions. A soul who had achieved deep peace might create artifacts that conveyed that tranquility to others, while someone who had transformed their pain into wisdom could craft tools that helped other spirits navigate similar challenges. The god took particular pleasure in visiting these workshops, not to judge or evaluate the creations being produced there, but to witness the joy that souls experienced when they discovered they could contribute something beautiful and meaningful to their community. These moments of creative fulfillment often marked turning points in a soul's development, when they fully embraced their eternal existence and began to explore its possibilities with genuine enthusiasm. Persephone had contributed significantly to the development of these creative spaces, bringing insights from the upper world about the relationship between beauty and growth. Her influence helped establish workshops where souls could learn to cultivate new forms of life and consciousness, creating spiritual offspring that enriched the entire realm. These weren't physical children, but rather new patterns of awareness and understanding that grew from the combination of different souls' wisdom and experience. Some developed into entirely new forms of consciousness that served specialized functions in the underworld's ecosystem, while others became repositories of particular types of knowledge that could benefit future arrivals. The collaborative nature of these creative endeavors fostered a sense of community among souls that transcended the divisions and conflicts that had often characterized their mortal relationships. In the absence of scarcity and competition, spirits discovered they could work together with perfect harmony, each contributing their unique gifts without fear of being overshadowed or diminished by others' achievements. Hades observed these collaborations with deep satisfaction, understanding that they represented the natural flowering of consciousness when freed from the constraints and fears that limited mortal potential. The god had always believed that cooperation was the natural state of enlightened awareness, and his realm provided the perfect environment for this belief to be proven correct. The seasonal rhythms established by Persephone's comings and goings had become integrated into all aspects of life in the underworld. During her absences, when the realm turned inward toward contemplation and individual growth, souls focused on deepening their understanding of themselves and their place in the cosmic order. These periods of introspection were essential for processing the insights gained during more active phases and integrating them into permanent changes in consciousness. Souls learned to value this quiet time, understanding that growth required both periods of expansion and periods of consolidation. When Persephone returned, bringing with her the energy of renewal and connection, the underworld would come alive with collaborative projects, celebrations of achievement, and the sharing of wisdom gained during the contemplative periods. These times of community activity strengthened the bonds between souls and created new possibilities for creative expression and mutual support. The goddess's own transformation during her time in the underworld had become a source of inspiration for all souls in the realm. They could see in her example that adaptation to new circumstances didn't require the abandonment of one's essential nature, but rather the discovery of hidden aspects of that nature that could flourish under different conditions. Her relationship with Hades had also evolved into a model for how different types of consciousness could complement each other without losing their individual characteristics. The king's steady depth provided a foundation for the queen's dynamic creativity, while her vitality and growth-oriented perspective prevented his contemplative nature from becoming stagnant or isolated. Together, they had created a form of partnership that enhanced both their individual gifts and their combined effectiveness as rulers of the underworld. Their daily interactions demonstrated to all souls in their realm that relationships could be sources of mutual enhancement rather than compromise or limitation. The gods' administrative duties had gradually transformed from burdensome obligations into opportunities for creative problem-solving and compassionate service. Each challenge that arose in the governance of the underworld became a chance to develop new approaches to fostering growth and harmony among diverse types of consciousness. Hades had learned to see his role less as that of a judge or ruler in the traditional sense, and more as a gardener of souls, providing the right conditions for each spirit to discover and express its highest potential. This perspective had transformed not only his approach to governance but his entire understanding of power and authority. True power, he had come to understand, lay not in the ability to compel obedience or impose one's will on others, but in the capacity to create environments where consciousness could flourish naturally, according to its own inherent patterns of growth and development. This realization had brought him a sense of fulfillment that exceeded anything he had ever imagined possible. The deep contentment that characterized Hades' existence in his realm radiated outward to influence every soul under his care, creating an atmosphere of such profound peace that even the most troubled spirits could feel its healing effects. This wasn't the artificial calm imposed by force or drugs, but the natural tranquility that emerges when consciousness finally finds its proper home. As the eternal twilight of the underworld wraps around these ancient tales like a soft blanket, let your own awareness settle into that same quality of deep rest that pervades Hades' domain. Feel the gentle weight of centuries pressing down upon your eyelids, carrying with them the accumulated wisdom of ages and the promise of dreams that will restore and renew your spirit for whatever tomorrow may bring. In the spaces between thoughts, where understanding flows like underground rivers, and peace spreads like morning mist across meadows that have never known the harsh light of urgent day, consciousness finds its natural rhythm of expansion and contraction, like breathing that requires no effort, because it follows the deeper currents that move through all existence. The stories of Athena and Hades continue to weave their subtle spell through the corridors of sleep, where wisdom and acceptance dance together in perfect harmony, where the weight of mortal concerns dissolves into the vast, welcoming darkness that cradles all things in its eternal embrace, and where the gentle voices of ancient gods whisper secrets that can only be heard by hearts that have learned the sacred art of listening with complete surrender to the mystery that holds us all. The transition between conscious thought and the realm of dreams mirrors the gentle passage that souls experience when moving from Hades' reception chambers to their permanent dwellings within his vast domain. Each newly arrived spirit underwent this migration with the careful guidance of experienced souls who had walked the same paths centuries or millennia before, their wisdom born from the patient accumulation of understanding that only eternal existence could provide. These guides possessed an intuitive knowledge of which routes through the underworld would best suit each individual soul's temperament and needs. Some spirits required the direct path through open meadows where they could see their destination clearly, while others benefited from winding trails through mysterious groves that allowed them to gradually acclimate to their new existence without feeling overwhelmed by its vastness. The god himself had walked every path in his realm countless times, understanding intimately how each route affected the consciousness that traveled it. He had designed these thoroughfares not merely as efficient means of transportation, but as therapeutic journeys that helped souls process their transition from temporal to eternal existence through the subtle influences of landscape and atmosphere. Certain paths were lined with trees whose leaves whispered with the accumulated memories of souls who had found peace, their rustling voices offering encouragement and wisdom to new travelers. Other routes passed by springs whose waters reflected not physical images but emotional truths, allowing spirits to see themselves clearly, perhaps for the first time since their mortal birth. The most challenging path led through a valley where souls confronted the shadows of their unresolved mortal experiences, but this route was reserved only for spirits who had developed sufficient strength and perspective to benefit from such intense self-examination. Hades personally accompanied souls on these difficult journeys, his presence providing the stability and support needed to face whatever emerged from the depths of buried memory. Some souls discovered during these shadow walks that experiences they had considered their greatest failures had actually been their most important learning opportunities, while others found that achievements they had prized in life had been motivated by fears and insecurities that no longer held any power in their transformed state of being. The god's skill in guiding these revelatory experiences came from his deep understanding that healing required not the elimination of difficult memories, but their integration into a larger perspective that could transform pain into wisdom and regret into compassion. He had learned through eons of practice exactly how much truth each consciousness could absorb at any given moment without becoming overwhelmed or fragmented. The residential areas of the underworld were organized according to principles that balanced individual preferences with communal harmony. Souls who had been scholars in life often gravitated toward library districts where they could continue their pursuit of knowledge in forms impossible during mortal existence. Artists found themselves drawn to creative quarters where the very air seemed to shimmer with inspiration and possibility. Those who had dedicated their mortal lives to service discovered neighborhoods where their compassionate natures could flourish through caring for souls who still struggled with aspects of their eternal transition. Former warriors often chose districts where they could channel their protective instincts into safeguarding the peace and security that made growth possible for more vulnerable spirits. But these associations were never rigid or permanent. Souls were free to explore different areas of the realm as their interests and understanding evolved, and many discovered capabilities and inclinations that had been completely hidden during their earthly existence. A former merchant might develop a profound gift for philosophical contemplation, while someone who had been shy and withdrawn in life might blossom into a natural teacher and guide. The god took particular delight in witnessing these unexpected transformations, understanding that they revealed the true potential that had always existed within each consciousness but had been constrained by the circumstances and expectations of mortal life. In his realm, freed from physical limitations and social pressures, souls could finally discover and express their authentic nature. The architecture of the underworld itself played a crucial role in facilitating these discoveries. Buildings seemed to reshape themselves subtly in response to the needs and growth of their inhabitants, providing exactly the right environment for whatever work or contemplation each soul was pursuing. A spirit engaged in deep philosophical study might find their dwelling gradually developing quiet alcoves and meditation spaces, while someone exploring artistic expression would discover that workshops and studios seemed to appear naturally as extensions of their living space. This responsive environment reflected Hades' understanding that consciousness required different conditions at different stages of development, and that forcing souls to adapt to rigid structures would only impede their growth. The god had designed his realm to be as flexible and supportive as possible, recognizing that true authority lay not in imposing his will, but in creating conditions where each soul could flourish, according to its own inner nature. The communal spaces throughout the underworld served similar adaptive functions, expanding or contracting based on the number of souls who wished to use them, and modifying their atmosphere to suit the activities taking place within them. A gathering, focused on intellectual discussion, would find itself surrounded by an environment that enhanced clarity of thought and communication, while a celebration of artistic achievement might be held in spaces that amplified creativity and joy. These environmental responses weren't magical in the sense of violating natural laws, but rather represented a more advanced understanding of the relationship between consciousness and its surroundings. In the underworld, the boundary between mind and matter was far more fluid than in the physical realm, allowing thoughts and intentions to influence reality directly through focused will and clear purpose. Souls gradually learned to participate in this creative relationship with their environment, discovering that they could contribute to the ongoing evolution of their realm through their own growth and understanding. As they developed greater wisdom and compassion, the areas around them became more beautiful and harmonious, creating a positive feedback loop that accelerated both individual and collective development. The god observed these processes with the satisfaction of a master craftsman watching apprentices develop their own skills and eventually surpass their teacher's original vision. His greatest pride came not from maintaining control over his domain, but from witnessing its continued evolution through the creative contributions of the souls who called it home. Persephone's influence on these environmental dynamics had been profound and lasting. Her understanding of growth and renewal had taught the entire realm new ways of thinking about change and adaptation. During her early years in the underworld, she had struggled with the apparent static nature of eternal existence, missing the dynamic cycles of birth, growth, and renewal that characterized the upper world. Her solution had been to introduce similar cycles into the underworld, but operating on temporal scales that suited eternal rather than mortal existence. These weren't the rapid changes of seasonal vegetation, but the slower rhythms of consciousness evolving through successive phases of understanding and integration. Under her guidance, the realm developed what could only be described as seasons of the soul, periods when certain types of growth and activity were naturally favored over others. During contemplative seasons, souls turned inward to deepen their self-understanding and integrate previous learning. Active seasons encouraged collaboration, creative expression, and the sharing of wisdom with others. These cycles helped prevent the stagnation that could affect even immortal consciousness if it remained too long in the same patterns of activity and thought. They provided natural opportunities for renewal and fresh perspective, while maintaining the underlying stability that was essential for souls still healing from the traumas of mortal existence. The goddess's own journey through these cycles had become a source of guidance and inspiration for other souls navigating similar transitions. Her willingness to share her struggles and insights created an atmosphere of openness and mutual support that permeated the entire realm. She had discovered that vulnerability, rather than being a weakness to be hidden, was actually one of the greatest gifts she could offer to souls who were wrestling with their own challenges and uncertainties. By acknowledging her own difficulties and describing how she had worked through them, she gave others permission to be honest about their struggles and to seek help when they needed it. This culture of openness and mutual support had gradually transformed the underworld from a place where souls endured their eternal existence to a community where they actively participated in each other's growth and healing. The competitive dynamics that had often characterized mortal relationships gave way to collaborative partnerships based on genuine care and shared purpose. Hades had watched this transformation with growing appreciation for his queen's wisdom and insight. Her contributions to their realm went far beyond the obvious gifts of beauty and vitality that she brought during her periods of residence. More importantly, she had helped create a social environment where souls could thrive rather than merely survive their eternal circumstances. The god's own relationship with time had been influenced by these developments. Where he had once experienced eternity as an endless succession of similar days, he now perceived it as a rich tapestry of evolving relationships and deepening understanding. Each conversation with a soul under his care revealed new facets of consciousness and existence that he had never previously considered. His daily walks through the various districts of his realm had become journeys of discovery rather than mere administrative rounds. In every corner of the underworld, souls were engaged in projects and pursuits that expanded his own understanding of what was possible for conscious beings freed from the constraints of physical existence. Some souls had developed forms of communication that transcended language, sharing complex ideas and emotions through direct transmission of understanding. Others had learned to create collaborative artworks that existed not as physical objects, but as shared experiences that could be entered and explored like vast, multi-dimensional landscapes of meaning. Still, others had discovered ways to heal not just their own psychological wounds, but to serve as conduits for healing energy that could benefit souls throughout the realm. These healers didn't work through techniques or treatments but through their very presence, having transformed their own suffering so completely that they radiated peace and acceptance that naturally soothed troubled spirits. The god found himself constantly learning from these evolved souls, his own understanding deepening through exposure to their insights and innovations. He had come to see his role less as that of a teacher or authority figure, and more as a facilitator and fellow student in the great ongoing experiment of conscious existence. This humility had paradoxically increased rather than diminished his effectiveness as a ruler. Souls sensed his genuine respect for their individual journeys and responded with trust and openness that made his guidance far more influential than any amount of divine authority could have achieved. The administrative structure of the underworld had evolved to reflect this collaborative approach to governance. While Hades remained the ultimate authority and decision-maker, he had developed an extensive network of advisors and assistants drawn from souls who had demonstrated particular wisdom or expertise in various aspects of eternal existence. These advisors weren't appointed based on their former mortal status or achievements, but rather on their demonstrated capacity for understanding and helping others navigate the challenges of immortal life. A former peasant who had developed profound insights into the nature of contentment might serve as a counselor to souls struggling with attachment to their former wealth or status. Similarly, someone who had been powerful in life but had learned to find meaning in service to others might help newly arrived rulers and leaders understand how to transform their drive for control into more constructive forms of influence and contribution. The god's decision-making process had become increasingly participatory, with complex issues being discussed openly among groups of souls who would be affected by the outcomes. This wasn't democracy in the modern sense, as Hades retained final authority and responsibility, but rather a form of consensual governance that honored the wisdom and autonomy of all participants. These discussions often continued for what would have been months or years in mortal time, allowing all perspectives to be thoroughly explored and understood before decisions were reached. The god had learned that in eternal existence, the quality of decisions mattered far more than their speed, and that taking time to reach true consensus created much better outcomes than imposing solutions through authority alone. The judicial aspects of his role had also evolved significantly from the simple judgment of souls based on their mortal deeds. While this initial assessment remained important for determining appropriate placements and treatments, the ongoing governance of the realm required much more nuanced approaches to conflict resolution and community harmony. Disputes between souls were rare, but not unknown, usually arising from misunderstandings or incompatible approaches to growth and development rather than from malice or selfishness. These conflicts were addressed through mediation processes that focused on understanding underlying needs and finding creative solutions that honored everyone's legitimate concerns. The god often served as a mediator in these situations, but his role was more that of a wise counselor helping the parties find their own solutions rather than a judge imposing external decisions. He had discovered that conflicts resolved through mutual understanding and agreement were far more stable and satisfying than those ended through authority or compromise. His success in this role came partly from his vast experience with different types of consciousness and conflict, but more importantly from his ability to see beyond surface disagreements to the deeper yearnings and fears that usually drove them. Souls who felt truly heard and understood were almost always willing to work together to find mutually beneficial solutions. The educational systems that had developed throughout the underworld reflected similar principles of respect for individual autonomy and natural learning processes. Rather than formal schools or curricula, knowledge was transmitted through mentorship relationships, collaborative projects, and experiential learning opportunities that allowed souls to discover truths for themselves. New arrivals were paired with experienced souls whose growth had followed similar patterns, creating relationships that combined practical guidance with emotional support. These mentorships weren't hierarchical, but rather reciprocal, with mentors often learning as much from their charges as they provided in return. The god had observed that the most profound learning occurred when souls felt safe to make mistakes, ask questions, and explore ideas that might initially seem foolish or unconventional. The atmosphere of acceptance and encouragement that pervaded his realm created ideal conditions for this type of natural learning to flourish. Libraries and learning centers throughout the underworld operated more like living repositories of experience than traditional collections of information. Souls could access not just factual knowledge, but the actual experiences and insights of countless others who had grappled with similar questions and challenges. This direct transmission of understanding eliminated many of the barriers that had limited learning in mortal existence. Concepts that might have taken years to comprehend through reading or instruction could be grasped almost instantly when experienced directly through the memories and insights of others who had already mastered them. But this ease of learning came with its own challenges and responsibilities. Souls had to develop discrimination about which experiences to integrate and which to observe without absorption. They also needed to learn how to contribute their own hard-won insights to the collective pool of knowledge without losing their individual perspective and understanding. The god served as a guide and guardian for these processes, helping souls navigate the vast ocean of available experience without becoming overwhelmed or losing their sense of personal identity. His own extensive experience with different forms of consciousness made him uniquely qualified to help others maintain their individual integrity while benefiting from collective wisdom. The creative arts had flourished in the underworld in ways that would have been impossible during mortal existence. Freed from physical limitations and commercial pressures, souls could explore pure expression of their deepest insights and emotions. The resulting artworks often served as bridges between different levels of understanding, making profound truths accessible to souls at various stages of development. Music in the underworld operated on frequencies that resonated directly with consciousness rather than merely physical hearing. Compositions could convey complex philosophical concepts, emotional healing, and spiritual insights in ways that bypassed intellectual barriers and spoke directly to the soul's deepest understanding. Visual arts took forms that had no equivalent in the physical realm, creating experiences rather than objects that could be inhabited and explored from within. A painting might become a landscape that viewers could enter and experience from multiple perspectives, each vantage point revealing different aspects of the artist's vision and meaning. Literary works evolved beyond written language into direct transmissions of narrative experience, where readers became participants in the stories being told. These immersive narratives could convey truths about existence and consciousness that were impossible to express through conventional storytelling techniques. The god found deep satisfaction in experiencing these innovative art forms, recognizing in them reflections of the infinite creativity and potential that consciousness could express when freed from conventional limitations. He often served as patron and audience for artistic endeavors, his appreciation and support encouraging souls to push even further into unexplored territories of creative expression. Collaborative artistic projects had become particularly important in fostering community and shared purpose throughout the realm. When souls worked together on creative endeavors, they developed forms of connection and understanding that enriched their individual growth while contributing to the collective wisdom and beauty of their shared environment. These collaborations often lasted for what would have been decades or centuries in mortal time, allowing for the development of works of extraordinary depth and complexity. The god had observed that the process of creation was often more valuable than the finished products, as souls learned through collaboration how to merge their individual gifts into something greater than any could achieve alone. The festivals and celebrations that marked significant achievements or transitions in the underworld had become elaborate community artworks in their own right. These events combined music, visual arts, storytelling, and interactive experiences that allowed all participants to contribute their unique perspectives and abilities to collective celebrations of growth and understanding. As your consciousness drifts deeper into the rhythmic flow of these eternal tales, let the gentle wisdom of ages settle into your awareness like snow falling on quiet fields. The voices of Athena and Hades continue their ancient dialogue across the corridors of sleep, where understanding flows like underground streams, and peace spreads through the chambers of the heart like candlelight in a vast cathedral. In this space where time moves like honey and thoughts dissolve into dreams, the weight of the day's concerns grows lighter with each breath, carried away on currents that flow toward shores where rest awaits all weary travelers. The stories of gods and mortals weave together into a tapestry of comfort that wraps around consciousness like a soft blanket, guiding awareness toward the deep contentment that lies at the heart of all existence. Here, in the borderland between waking and sleeping, where ancient wisdom whispers its secrets to hearts that have learned the art of listening without effort, the gentle voices of myth and memory continue their eternal conversation, speaking truths that can only be heard by souls who have surrendered to the vast, welcoming darkness that cradles all things in its infinite embrace. The god's understanding of his role as guardian of this transition between conscious awareness and the realm of dreams had deepened through eons of witnessing souls discover their capacity for growth and transformation. Each night that brought peaceful rest to weary consciousness confirmed his belief that even the most challenging experiences could ultimately serve the greater purpose of spiritual development and understanding. In the quiet hours when the boundary between individual awareness and universal consciousness grew thin, Hades walked through his realm with the satisfaction of knowing that every soul under his care was exactly where they needed to be, learning exactly what they needed to learn, and moving at exactly the pace that would best serve their eternal journey toward wisdom and peace. And peace. And so, our journey through these ancient realms draws to its gentle close, like the last notes of a lullaby fading into the peaceful silence of night. We've walked with Athena through her temples of wisdom, where the soft scratch of stylus on wax tablet mingles with the whispered prayers of those seeking understanding. We've descended into Hades' tranquil domain, where time moves like honey, and every soul finds its perfect rest beneath the patient gaze of the most compassionate of all the gods. These stories of divine wisdom and eternal peace remind us that even in our modern world of endless distractions and urgent demands, there exists a deeper rhythm, a quieter truth that calls us home to rest. Athena's measured counsel and Hades' gentle authority echo still in the spaces between our thoughts, offering the same comfort they provided to mortals thousands of years ago. As you drift now toward your own peaceful underworld of sleep, carry with you the knowledge that wisdom flows like underground rivers through the chambers of dreams, and that rest, true rest, is not emptiness but fullness, not absence but presence. Let these ancient voices guide you into the soft darkness where consciousness finds its natural rhythm, where every breath draws you deeper into the vast, welcoming mystery that holds us all. Sweet dreams, dear listeners, and may you wake refreshed by the gentle wisdom of gods who understood that sometimes the greatest gift we can receive is simply permission to let go, to rest, to dream.